I don't think I'll go over my time, but I could, so I'm going to start just a minute early and be respectful of your time. I'm going to start off, and Mr. Green has brought me folders and folders of stuff, and I appreciate that, and I got one out, and I was going to use it tonight because I thought it was pertaining, and I've read it so many times I left it at home, but I'm going to try it anyway. But the story goes that some atheists were in a courtroom, and they wanted to file suit against the country because the Christians had holidays like Christmas and Easter, and there was no holiday for the atheist. And the judge heard their testimony for 5 or 10 minutes and slammed his gavel down and said, "Case dismissed. I'm not going to hear it." And the atheist says, "Well, why won't you hear it? It ought to be fair for all of us. If we don't think there's a God, we ought to have our own holiday." He said, "You do have your own holiday." He said, "If you read in the Bible in Psalms 14:1, it says, 'The fool has said in his heart, there is no God.' April 1st is set aside for you every year. It's called April Fool's Day."
Ooh.
So there goes your holiday. And I appreciate you bringing that, Mr. Green. But in the email, if you got it again, if you're not getting them, if you'll send me an email, I'll add you to the list, but that's the only way I can add you. I don't know how to do it other way. So my email is joedorman@yahoo.com. Add a D to it, and I'll get it, and just make me a note, say add me to the list, and I'll put you on. I'm going to talk about storms tonight. I think last month we talked a little bit about the book I read that I told you I think was written in 1992 by Billy Graham called Storm Warnings. And just the more I read that book, the more impressed I got with it, how it can be written that long ago. But if we look around today, all these storm warnings are happening. And it's just it's kind of like the Bible. You know, it was God driven to be that accurate with what's happening today. So I know we all go through storms. I do, and I don't know anybody that hasn't had their issues with at times. But I want to talk a little bit about them, and maybe someone that's having some issues that might help you along, hopefully. I'm going to give you a few facts about storms. First fact is there's no way around it. I mean, we're going to have rainstorms, hailstorms, snowstorms, windstorms. They're coming. We're going to have them. We just got to deal with them. Life is the same way. We have our problems in life. We have financial storms, personal storms, problems that just pop up, and it's a fact. We just are going to have our storms. Another fact is the fastest way through a storm is straight through the middle of it. If you flirt around the edges of it, you'll just stay in the storm a lot longer. The best way to get through a storm is put your head down and go through the middle of it. I remember when my kids started playing like midget league football or something, they were 11, 12, 13 years old. The coach told them, and I didn't play, so I didn't know this. He said, "Now guys, if you're going to get hit, don't do what your body tells you to or your reflexes and turn. You got no padding on the side, you got no padding in the back. You keep face toward the storm and go through it. And that's the best way through the storm. You don't have any protection on the side." So I thought that was a pretty good advice from the coach. Storms are normally looked at as bad, and understand why. But I think also storms could be looked at as good. Sometimes if we don't suffer a few hard times, we won't recognize the good times and appreciate them nearly as much. The Bible talks about storms occasionally, and it refers to in Romans as tribulations. When we talk about storms are good, Romans 5:3-4 says, "And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations." We glory in storms, basically. Storms produce tribulation produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And guys, if you got no hope, you got no reason to live. There's a lot of people that came to my mind. Keith Whitley was a good country music singer, but evidently he had everything he could want for and had no hope. Whitney Houston, man, could sing the phone book. She could sing. Michael Jackson had all the fame in the world, but he had no hope, had nothing to live for, had everything you could imagine ever wanting. Robin Williams was the best comedian I think ever been. He was just natural born funny and depressed himself to death. It's just a fact. If you don't go through some storms, I think you've got to have some hope, and you can work yourself into a situation where you really have no hope. Sometimes they're just terrible. Sometimes storms are loud enough just to reckon to kind of get our attention so we can move forward. Yeah. Sometimes they can be predicted. You think of a hurricane. Hurricanes, they see them coming across the coast all the way from Africa, and it takes 2 weeks sometimes to get here. And the weather center is getting pretty good at predicting them. They can pretty well tell you with the wind currents and the water temperatures where that storm's going now. It's a great help to be prepared for a storm. That old comedian James Gregory tells about it. The hurricane, he says that there's always a couple of people that's going to say, shoot, we'll go to the Home Depot, get us some plywood, we'll ride the thing out. We just get some plywood, ride it out. Well, his wife saw all these people leaving town, and she said, well, why are all them people leaving? He said, they couldn't buy no plywood. But storms can be predicted, and you can prepare for them. Financial storms are the same way. They can bite you, but for the most part, we know when our house insurance is due, when our house payment's due, our car payments. If you plan ahead, you can put money aside for kids to go to school, things that you can plan, and they won't bite you quite as bad. There's also those ones that pop up unexpected. I don't know if anybody's bought a refrigerator in the last 3 years, but if you have, you're due another one. About 3 years max. If there's an ice maker in it, maybe 2. It's just, and those storms, they'll surprise you. They'll catch you off guard. The best news I can tell you about a storm, and everybody needs to hear this because I really hadn't thought about it, but this is a fact that we can prove. There has never, ever, never in the history of the entire world been a storm that didn't end. All storms pass, all storms end. I know sometimes they're terrible and bad, and we might be in the middle of one right now, but just know with time, this too shall pass. The Lord has promised us from the Old Testament clear through the New. Deuteronomy 31:8 and Hebrews 13:5 says he will never leave us nor forsake us. Storms will pass. He'll help us through it if we'll call on him. I want to talk a little bit about a storm that's a pretty popular story in the book of Matthew. But again, the more I read these things and the more they speak back to me, it's just stuff that's kind of blows your mind to think, well, I don't see why I didn't read that to start with. But Matthew, let's see. Matthew 8:18 said, and when Jesus saw a great multitude about him, he gave a command to depart to the other side. A command. And I've read that, but I never caught that word command. He told the disciples to get in a boat, we're going to the other side. And you think, well, why? Well, there were sinners on the other side. There were actually Gentiles on the other side. Where they were at was Jewish territory, and he was taking them over where they had not heard about Jesus. They had to go to the other side so those people could hear about Jesus. It's knowing they were going to get in a storm, knowing if you take that risk, that's the disciples probably knew it. Maybe they had an idea. Some of those guys were fishermen. They probably had the gut feeling that the weather was bad, but they really feared for their lives just to find out Jesus was asleep in the boat. You wonder how many times when we're in a storm and in a terrible way, when we just look around and see if Jesus is asleep right there with us and just wake him up and get some help. I think this story is very symbolic of the church today. The Bible has a lot of symbolisms when you really get down to it and study it a little bit. But I think the boat in this story represents the church. And I think the sea represents the world. And there's people in the world that need to know about the church, but if the church don't untie the boat and get in the sea, they'll never hear about it. So there's people out there that need to hear about Jesus, but if we don't untie our boat, again, he commanded, that's that word I missed earlier, he commanded they get in the boat and go to the other side. I think quite often the church is happy where they're at. They don't want to take the risk of trying something new. And it's like, well, we better stick with what we got because this is working. And they're dying. If you're not growing, you're dying. So the key there is to get to the other side, the boat had to get into the water. But you can't let the water get into the boat. It'll sink. If the church is going to reach the lost, it's got to get into the world, but it can't let the world get into church. You've got to be in the world, but you can't get of the world. You've got to bring the world into our doctrines, and you can't follow the world doctrines. But we have been commanded to do this. It's obvious to me that this is just a symbolic story that we're to follow and do. But if we don't do it the right way, we'll sink. We've got to stick to our doctrines. But I think quite often the churches are afraid to take the risk to go. I mean, we did it here with this first service, and we must have had 200 people here yesterday. We had a house full, and it was not Easter, it was not Christmas. We just had a good service, and people are inviting people. They're enjoying the service. You can feel the Holy Spirit here, and His Word is getting out, and that's growing. And we are getting ready to untie a right big boat and tear out that wall and build this much more building over there and have room for this growth. We're going to untie the boat. That's kind of what I wanted to tell you about the storms, but I want to tell you kind of if I can, a personal story. And you know, when I do personal stuff, I get kind of choked up and can't talk. But I'm gonna try. But it's very relevant to what we're talking about, and it's very true. It's just gonna be hard for me to do it, and it's a good story. But I've got 4 boys, all good boys, equally, fine kids, no trouble ever. If I call them Sunday morning, they're in church. One's a preacher. One's a deacon in his church. One's active in a church in Georgia. One's active in a church in Andrew here. They've got 4 good wives. Gave me 4 good daughter-in-laws. I've got 10 really good grandchildren. All good kids. All in church. All doing the right thing. I don't mean to single one out, but I'd like to tell you about old grandson, Gunner. Some of you've heard it, but Gunner's got a sister named Bailey who is a really good athlete. She can do anything, and she is probably ranked in the top 5 in the state in volleyball and maybe in the top 100 in the country, and just playing on travel ball. Colleges are already looking at her. She is just a natural-born athlete. Gunner's kind of hung in her shadow, I think, and I've talked to Alex a little bit. Something this year has kind of woke him up. He's just started. He's always had a good glove in the field, but he started hitting the baseball this year just crazy. He's in the 8th grade. He's playing on the high school varsity baseball team, and he's starting. He's pitching, playing shortstop, playing outfield, doing a really good job. And he's playing guys 4 or 5 years older than he is and holding his own very well. Just, it seems like he gets an unfair share of storms. And it might be me. Sometimes I think the preachers get an unfair share of storms, and his daddy's a preacher. Might be my opinion, might be just something that I see, but it looks like things kind of happen, and Gunner's always been a good kid, a really good kid. He stands out. People recognize him. They tell me things about him, and I'll share some more of that with you in a little bit. But it was kind of April the 8th was a Monday, and he got a phone call. He got invited to play in an all-world, all-star travel team. Top 100 were picked. They'll play in August in Florence at a $20 million facility, something, I mean, just a really big deal. They provide him with 2 uniforms, hats, certificates, plaques, and stuff, even a ring, like a World Series All-Star ring. It was a really big deal for a 14-year-old kid, I thought. I mean, something I would never even think about could happen. But he got invited on Monday the 8th. Tuesday the 9th, he was pitching for practice at his high school team, and a kid hit a line shot up. I'm sorry, guys. Kid hit a line drive, hit him right there. It was a hard hit ball. They couldn't get his nose stopped bleeding for about 24 to 30 hours. And they didn't take him to a doctor because it didn't look bad. It didn't really swell. It was just a nosebleed. And well, it'll quit in a few minutes. Well, it never did quit. So Wednesday, they took him to a orthopedic doctor, which is what you do with sports injuries. Well, orthopedics don't work on faces. They work on elbows and knees and ankles and joints. But that doctor said, I can't help you. Gordon would understand this. They sent him to an oral surgeon because it was in his face. The oral surgeon x-rayed it, and he told him, I don't know that I have the proper equipment, but what I see in there is really bad. His cheekbone's crushed. Parts of it's gone. His nasal passages are blocked, probably crushed. Sinus cavities are just destroyed, just a mess. He's thinking surgery, put a plate in, plastic surgery after that, probably months and months of storms. My son is the preacher. He sat with me Thursday. Of course, his church prayed for Gunner Wednesday night. Clay's class, we offered him for prayer Wednesday night in our little side class at Clay's. Prayer works, guys. Thursday, 4 or 5 o'clock, my son's sitting in the office. We're talking about the situation, what to do, and just, he said, and don't want to get too personal with this stuff, but he preaches, he works side jobs, he builds decks, he remodels houses, he can do anything with his hands, anything. And he works hard. He had saved enough money to pay his taxes. He had a tax bill about $8,000. He said, I've got my tax money set up, and then this thing hits, and he said, I reckon I'll spend my tax money on my young'un. So now, what do we do? I said, we get through it. We'll get through it. I told him, I said, I'm talking about storms. This is another storm, and it'll pass. We'll handle it. So his phone rings about that time. His wife has found a place in Garner that they need to take Gunner. They've got better equipment to look and take better pictures, and they've got to go through the ER to get there. So if you ever had experience with the emergency rooms in the hospital, they ain't good. You sit and you sit. And I said, well, I'll go with you. He said, no, my wife's at the beach. I'll go. He said, no, you go home. I'll take him. There's no need of both of us sitting there and going through that rigmarole to get him seen. So I said, well, I'm going home. I ain't going to bed till you call me. I'll sit up and watch. I was working on this stuff. I watch a lot of other preachers. I steal their messages and I bring and share it with you guys. And I was watching Robert Morris. He had a 4 sermon series mostly on Joseph and the troubles he went through. And he was referring to them as storms. I thought it was pretty good. So I had watched 2 of those. That Thursday night, I went home expecting to watch the 3rd one. Well, I'm not real good with televisions and electronics. I couldn't find it. I went through everything I knew to go through, and it had been popping right up, 1, 2, but no 3. All I could find was a message on miracles, which I had watched twice already. So I said, well, I watched this one. Need a miracle anyway. I sent Alex. I said, just pop up. I can't find the message. He and I had talked about what I was doing. I said, I'm watching one on Robert Morris on miracles. Maybe we're going to get a miracle. He said, we sure need one. And I've got the text on my phone where we were texting back and forth. And in a few minutes, I don't know, 8:45 or 9 o'clock, he said that they just took him in. They got the CT scan or the MRI. I don't even know what they done yet, but they did another scan. They did scan. He said they'll read it maybe a little bit tonight, but the diet got it. These reasons will be tomorrow. But in 30 minutes, he called me back, and they were on the road home. He said, this guy don't see much wrong. Now, he's not the guy that reads it, but it all looks better than it did yesterday or day before. So, well, thank the Lord. So the next morning was Friday, and they got the full report. Clint, you'll have to wait. Hold my calls, Jerry.
Oh, man.
But that Friday morning, they got the report. The nasal passages were no problem. They could see nothing wrong with the nasal passages. Sinus passages were fine. The jawbone, they could see where it had a crack. Possibly it had a crack. Every bone was in place.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. It was, no surgery needed, no plates needed, no plastic surgery. Now, the doctor there told him, he said, the guy that looked at him in Fayetteville didn't have what I've got, and don't go talk ugly to him because he just didn't have the equipment. Now, you can say the doctor misdiagnosed, or you can say the Lord stepped in. Mm-hmm. Either way, he's good. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're thankful for. Amen. Here's where pride comes in, and pride's a bad thing in the Bible, and I've heard all my life that pride gets you in trouble, and the Bible proves it. But what they don't understand was Jesus didn't have no kids, and if Jesus had had kids, God would have had grandkids, and he'd have had a little place in there where he said it's all right if you've got pride. There I go blaspheming again, but I think that would be a fact. So Friday, Gunner had a baseball game that afternoon. Now he's not cleared to play. His daddy and I have both been put in games in high school where we were injured. His daddy had a shoulder dislocated playing football, and you've seen the blow up guys in front of the stores that the fan blows in on him. He's out there trying to make a tackle, and his arm's like that right there going down the field. So we've got a little experience with coaches, and when they need somebody in the game that don't need to be in the game. So Alex kind of stood up and said, look, kid ain't playing baseball Friday. He can't. And the coach said, I don't need him to play. I just need him in the dugout. He said, you need to understand. He said, the little rascal's like a fly in everybody's face. You're going to get it. You're going to do all right. You're going to be all right. You're going to do it. If you miss a ball in the outfield, look, that one's gone. They'll hit you another next inning and get your head up, and you'll catch the next one. Now let that one go. It's gone. And he's that way. The coach said he didn't need him to play. He needed him there to motivate. So what I'm trying to tell you is, like it said in Romans, through the storms, through the turbulence, they create perseverance. Perseverance creates character. And that little fella's character gave hope for the team to win. And he couldn't play, but just him being there, and for somebody to recognize that and say that about my grandson, I'm very proud. Amen. This past Sunday, they were playing in Smithfield, and they had the lead early, but they put a guy in pitching, and he walked several, and they lost their lead. And then, as 14, 15-year-olds do, they started blaming the other one, and it was jibber jabber, and they were one short, coach short, and they really couldn't do what the coach should have done and stepped in there and stopped it. but the whole team was getting down, and I wanted to go over and stop it myself, but that's none of my business. So we just kind of listened to a little bit of it and went on, and they played on through. And 2 innings later, the umpire from the field, now Gunner's playing shortstop at this time. The umpire from the field walks clear across the field to the fence where we're sitting, and he looks up through the fence. He said, "Whose mama is the shortstop?" And I thought, oh, God, what has he said now? And I didn't say nothing. I just kind of sat quiet. And the lady over here said, "What'd you say?" He said, whose mama is the shortstop? And she looked at me, and I said, "Her." And I said, "Heather, this guy needs to ask you something or tell you something." She said, "What is it?" He said, "Are you the shortstop's mama?" She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "That's a fine boy." He said, "I've enjoyed my time on the field with him."
How about that? Awesome.
I have no idea what he said. Haven't really asked him. We talked a little bit about it, but he said, we just talking baseball. But I don't know what it is about the little fella, but he does go through an unfair share of storms, I think. But he leaves an impression on people. And it's hard to tell you that a 14-year-old ought to be our role model, but something like that would make me a role model, and something that I'm very proud of. And I wish I could stand here and talk about it better than I can, but it just gets all over me. But through all the storms, to know that he can still motivate a baseball team and catch the eye or the idea or the ear of an umpire that's probably 50 years old, to walk across the baseball field to tell his parents that he's a good kid. So the storms won't keep you down but so long. If you're in a storm, I'm sorry, keep your head down and we'll get through it. And thank you. And I went over my time, and I really appreciate you putting up with me. But something I just felt like I needed to share, and I knew I was going to struggle with it, but thank you. Next month, I don't get the date right, but it will be right before Father's Day. Typically, we do it after, but this year I want to do it before. We're going to do pancakes and sausage. I'd like for you to bring your kids or bring your daddy. I don't care.
Wrong month. Wrong month.
It's coming right behind it. It's the next one. But it's early in June, so I could do it after, or I can be ahead of time. And I'm being ahead of time. You boys, it's late. You can do your own thing.
This is the Joe Show.
This is the Joe Show. We're going to do it when I say. It's May the 27th, and we're going to have sausage and pancakes and young'uns and old folks too. That's Memorial Day.
Always falls.
It's always Memorial Day, every last month. This is the Joe Show. Not got nothing to do with Memorial Day. When you get home from the beach, you'll probably be hungry. Come and eat you some pancakes. Yeah, we will have it next month. Thank you, guys. And went long. If you got prayer requests, raise your hand unless it's really serious, and we'll dismiss and go.